Hey there, folks. This is Kevin Madison from Project Dragonfly. I hope you enjoy this podcast about Dragonfly community members doing inspiring work. If you have ideas for a guest or want to be more involved in this podcast, please feel free to directly email me. Thanks again for listening and enjoy the episode. This week, Dragonfly student Aimee Kemp once again joins as host and interviewer, and she brought quite a wonderful guest, Dr. Doug Tallamy. For those that do not know, Douglas Tallamy is an entomologist, conservationist, and professor in the Department of Entomology at the University of Delaware. He has written and co-authored over 140 papers and several books, notably Bringing Nature Home. And he also is a founder of the Homegrown National Park, a grassroots call to action organization that is looking to regenerate biodiversity and ecosystem function by planting native plants. Doug Tallamy is the guru of the native plant movement currently and is quite an inspiring speaker and guest for our podcast. Thanks so much, Aimee, and thanks so much, Doug. Enjoy the episode.
All right, so I'm here with Douglas Tallamy, and I am going to talk to him today about his expertise on bringing biodiversity back to our gardens, our home gardens. So Douglas, not sure if you prefer to be called Doug.
I do. Call me
Doug.
Doug.
Okay, so Doug, I know you've done a lot of work with ecology and entomology in North America and just ecosystem studies in general. What inspired you to become an entomologist and ecologist? What was your moment?
Well, I was born loving nature. So I grew up, liking snakes and turtles and toads and things like that. I didn't know anything about insects. But in college, I was a biology major. In the junior year, I took a course in entomology from Robert Bugbee. And if you take a course in entomology from Dr. Bugbee, then you have to become an entomologist. So I did. But yeah, I found that, they were extraordinarily interesting, great research subjects. I actually became a behavioral ecologist. And if you're going to do experiments with behavior, you can work with elephants and get one generation in your lifetime, or you can work with insects and get one generation a month and actually graduate. So they were very handy research subjects, but they're, just enormously interesting. And, come to find out, they are essential to our life here on planet Earth. As E.O. Wilson said, if Earth were to lose its insects, life as we know it would end. And that makes them pretty important. And of course, very few people know that. We've got this societal hatred of insects. And so, as I close out my career, I am trying to reverse that. And that's a big job.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely takes a lot of people and collaboration, getting multitudes of people on board. So thank you once again for contributing to that. So I know you've also done with your research, what are some of the key takeaways that you would offer to anybody who's just, passing through, wanting to hear more information from you about that?
Okay, it's not a soundbite, but it starts with the biodiversity crisis that we have on planet Earth. We've got climate change, but we also have the biodiversity crisis. And if we had no climate change, we would still have the biodiversity crisis. Mm. And it's a crisis because our existence here depends on biodiversity. We don't live in a vacuum. We're totally connected to nature. We depend on the life support that ecosystems provide, and those ecosystems are nature. So we've got parks, we've got preserves. They're doing the best they can, but we are in the 6th great extinction event the planet has ever experienced. So it's obviously not good enough. So we have to practice conservation outside of parks and preserves. What is outside of parks and preserves? It's our private property. 78% of the lower 48 states is privately owned, and 85% east of the Mississippi is privately owned, which means we have to practice conservation on private property. And the downside of that is that all the people who own private property don't know that. The upside is it enlists an enormous army of future conservationists. All we have to do is tell them that this is essential. It's their responsibility because we all need functioning ecosystems. We all depend on them. So we all should share in the good earth stewardship to keep those ecosystems functioning. We need ecosystem function everywhere, not just in parks and preserves. And what I found is that when people hear that message, they like it. They get empowered because, they're upset about the loss of biodiversity. They're upset about the problems the earth has. We hear we've lost 3 billion breeding birds in the last 50 years. We've got global insect decline. People are upset about these things. What I tell them is you can do something about it. You can see the difference and you become an important part of the solution. And that empowers them. With all the other environmental problems we have on this planet, there's very little one person can do and see a difference. You can see a difference with this. So they really like that. And I think that's the main reason why it's actually working. I've been talking about this for 20 years, and I do see a measurable difference. So I'm optimistic.
Yeah, I mean, you transformed your own property into like a whole biodiversity oasis. I saw that you had cataloged, I forgot how many species, but I think you had a lot of grass to start with, and then you transformed it.
The property was mowed for hay, so it should be an eastern deciduous forest.
Mm-hmm.
And we started planting plants right away. I started with the trees, planted a lot of acorns and things. So we've been here 24 years, but for the last it's probably 7 years now, I have been counting the number of moth species that are now making a living on our property. And I am up to 1,262 that I have pictures of. If you want to watch that PowerPoint, that's a lot of species that have come back.
Amazing.
And those species are bird food. So we've recorded 62 species of birds that have bred on our property, which tells me nature is really resilient. We did that because we put the plants back. What would happen if everybody put the plants back? We really could turn headlines that we're seeing around because it just wasn't that hard. We had to get rid of the invasive plants.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to monitor them because, of course, they're coming in all the time. So you have to stay on top of it. You have to put the plants that support the food web into your yard, and we've done that. You really should control deer. We haven't done that. So
it's probably pretty hard to do.
We know how to do it, but we haven't. But those are the three big things. Plant natives, remove invasives, control your deer, and you've got a functioning ecosystem again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, your property is proof of that. I mean, I've seen in my own front yard, I took over a large patch of lawn. We're on a corner property, and I've planted a bunch of native shrubs and perennials. And my son and I today saw our first bumblebee queen out and about, and we were very excited. We were super excited because we also put little like rock piles and we left all the sticks. And so you're right. It's absolutely something that everyone can do. And it's so empowering when you see something making a difference. So for people who don't have, huge swaths of property or a large yard, what are some things that they can do to help contribute?
Well, small properties work too, and I've got some good examples of that. But if you have no property, I mean, if you live in an apartment,
Mm-hmm.
you have a front porch or you have a balcony, you can still contribute with container planting. So on our website, homegrownnationalpark.org, you can go and find the section about native plants for containers by ecoregion. So wherever you live, it'll tell you what are the best plants that do well in containers that are going to bloom and be important resources for pollinators, for the migrating monarch. It's not as good as having 10 acres to deal with, but picture an apartment complex where everybody's got a balcony there. Right now, they're all bare. It's a pile of bricks. But if they were brimming with plants, it would be an important resource to any of the native pollinators in our cities. And 82% of us live in cities. So a lot of people that can get involved in a very meaningful way, and you can sit there on your porch and watch it. It'll happen. They're very mobile insects. It doesn't matter how high you are, they will find you.
Yeah, I read a paper recently where they were talking about hummingbirds finding like high-rise buildings. So let's see here. Are there specific species that you're trying to focus on? Are there target species, or are you just basically starting from the invertebrates and then everything kind of falls into place? Or I guess you're actually probably starting with the plants. You're
Starting with
starting with the plants. Yeah.
It has been a lot of fun to see the different things that have come back. I have targeted species in the past. So I wanted the zebra swallowtail on our property. Well, they only develop on pawpaws. So I planted pawpaws and I had to wait 9 years, but they finally did show up. And I've got a lot of stories like that. I'm not targeting anything in particular right now, but this year I've got a little pond that I dug in the front, and we got wood frogs for the first time. The wood frogs live in the woods, and remember, our property was mowed for hay, so it's it's a big deal for me. There's a whole bunch of pollywogs swimming around in there now, and so every year we get something new. The biodiversity increases. It's not just insects, but of course those wood frogs are going to eat insects, and we have a lot of them. So.
There are people who may argue that, the green lawn is, their idea is, they want the white picket fence and the green lawn and the lush green space. What's something you might say to help change some viewpoints or encourage people that have lawns to even make one piece of little, invertebrate habitat or native plant habitat?
Well, I'll go back to that statement that we are products of nature and we depend on the life support that it supplies. There are 4 things every property needs to do in order to contribute to that life support. Every property has to sequester carbon. We really do have to address climate change, and plants are a great way to do that. Every property has to support pollinators, not because of agriculture, but because they pollinate 90% of all flowering plants and 80% of all plants. Every property has to support a food web. So if you have plants that capture energy from the sun and turn it into food, but don't pass it on to other animals, you essentially have it's a dead end street landscape, and you're not contributing to ecosystem function. And then finally, every landscape has to manage the watershed in which it lies. Every single landscape out there is in a watershed. And whether you manage it responsibly or not is going to impact everybody else. The main message here is that our landscapes are not like Las Vegas. Everything that happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, but everything that happens on our properties does not stay there. Whatever we do, for good or for bad, impacts the local ecosystem. So there's a social responsibility, an ethical responsibility to impact that ecosystem in a positive way. That's what I would tell that person. Their white picket fence, that's great. They can have that. But when they have, lawn does none of those things I just mentioned. And it's a cue for care, and it's a perfect plant to walk on. So I'm not saying eliminate the lawn, but I am saying let's cut it in half. We've got 44 million acres of lawn out there. That's an area bigger than New England. And it's dedicated to an ecological deadscape. We can do better. We really can do better.
For people who, they're more interested in like pretty flowering things, they might not realize what, native plants are available to them or how to even get them. Do you have any advice for people looking to make this change?
Yes. More and more nurseries are carrying native plants. They understand that this is a business opportunity. Nurserymen just want to sell plants. They don't care whether they come from China or not, as long as you buy them. In the past, we did not buy them. So, they've got this saying, well, is this going to work? But right now, the demand for native plants far exceeds the supply. So people are going into the business, and getting the appropriate plants is not going to be as big of a problem in the future. I have pictures of some really nice, small, urban, and I mean the center of Chicago, properties that are landscaped with 100% native plants. And if I showed you those pictures, first of all, you wouldn't know that. You say, oh, this is a really pretty property. People don't know what's a native or non-native. They know what's blooming or what's not blooming.
Yeah.
And you can do that. So the idea that native plants are all ugly is ridiculous. Our native plants are used in formal gardens in Europe every day, and they love them over there. If they can love our native plants, so can we. The problem has been marketing by the horticultural trade that says it's got to be from someplace else. It does not have to be from someplace else. The real trick is, how do we use these plants in an aesthetically pleasing way that also is ecologically functional? That means you've got to include host plants for caterpillars, because caterpillars are the meat and potatoes of terrestrial ecosystems. If you don't have a lot of caterpillars in your yard, you won't have breeding birds. If you don't have breeding birds, I mean, that's our charismatic megafauna these days. It says you don't have a functional ecosystem if a bird can't breed on your property. And you know, the idea, oh, they're going to eat everything, is also ridiculous, because there's so many things out there depending on those caterpillars. A single clutch of tiny birds, chickadees, and many other bird species feed their young thousands, 9,000 caterpillars to get one clutch of birds to the point where they leave the nest. When they finish raising that one nest in your yard, you won't find any caterpillars, I guarantee it, because they have eaten them all. The object is having enough caterpillars to support that food web. And that means we've got to use plants that make a lot of caterpillars. And the best plant for doing that in most places of the country is one of our oaks. So plant an oak, you have planted a bird feeder, you've allowed the chickadee to breed, you've done a whole bunch of things, and it was pretty easy to do.
And are there native oak species throughout all of North America?
No, we have 91 species of oaks, but they do not occur in the upper portion of the Rockies, and in the driest portions of the upper high plains ecosystem. But every other place, there's at least one species of oak. And in the southeast, that's the center of distribution for oaks in our country. I don't know, there's 30 or 40 species. We've got 91 species of oaks in this country. California has, I don't know, 30 species of oaks. So there's plenty of oaks to go around. But if you live in an area that has no oaks, don't force them in there, because then they're growing in a place where they're not interacting with the things that need them. So it won't accomplish the goal you want. You've got to go with, I call them keystone plants, the plants that are supporting the most caterpillars wherever you are. And in most places of the country, that is an oak. But willows are very high as you get farther and farther north. Willows take over as the #1 keystone. In the drier areas of the West, along rivers and streams, riparian carders, cottonwoods take over as the best. So you have to, we talk about celebrating a sense of place. If you've got to celebrate the ecoregion in which you live. When I fly into Denver, it looks like Philadelphia, because most of the people that live in Denver have come from the east, and they brought all their eastern trees with them. They don't have the water. They've got to water them just to keep them alive. It's transforming an ecosystem in a very unsustainable way. So go with the ecosystem you have. If you live in one that's not as pretty as where you came from, then move back. But you can't change the ecosystem.
Yeah, that's definitely some good advice. And I think it's a common maybe misconception, excuse me, amongst people that, oh, it's from North America, so it's a native species. The black-eyed Susan is a really good example of that. Black-eyed Susans are not native to the Northeast, and people love them, but they're not native to the Northeast, and I see them everywhere. I actually have one in a pot and just learned recently they're not native to the Northeast. I was like, oh, okay.
The genus actually is native.
Yeah, Rudbeckia is, but the actual, yeah.
Yeah, we're not trying to make a native plant museum where you get species from all over the country. It's got to be with the plants and animals it has evolved with, so that the interactions between them create that ecosystem function. If they're not interacting, I mean, that's the problem with our ornamental plants, things like Bradford pear, Callery pear. It blooms, it's pretty, it's everywhere, it's an invasive species. It's contributing very little energy to the food web, and it's pushing out the plants that are contributing a lot of energy to the food web. Why is it pushing them out? Because the deer don't like it. It's not that it's a super plant, it's that the deer don't like it. So there's a competitive disadvantage against our native plants with things like privet and barberry and multiflora rose and burning bush and Callery pear
Japanese knotweed.
Japanese knotweed. These are all things the deer won't eat. So of course they're there, and the deer eat, the baby oak comes up, it's gone in 5 minutes. So of course it's competitive. It would be if we got deer back below their carrying capacity.
So when someone is looking for native plants for their yard, how far out should their ecoregion go?
There are maps of where the ecoregions lie. There's all kind. It goes up to ecoregion level 8, 9, 10 or something. Look at ecoregion level 2. You can find it easily on the web, and the maps, you look where you live and you'll see which ecoregion you belong to. That's the best guide. Now, ecoregions change. Now, if you're in California, there are a lot of ecoregions in California because it's a huge state and it's got a lot of relief. You've got lowlands, you've got the lowest place in the country, and you've got the highest place in the country. And ecoregions change as you go up both latitude and altitude. So you have to be sensitive to that. In the East, we've got it easy because, we don't have a whole lot of altitude, and a plant that's growing in Ohio is a very similar ecoregion and selective pressures compared to one that's growing in New Jersey along the same latitude. So we can be pretty sloppy about it and still have functional food webs. And that's the goal, functional food webs.
Yeah, that's definitely good to know and very helpful for anybody who's, trying to make sure they do the right thing with what they're putting in their yards. I guess what's sorry. What's one last takeaway one last message you'd like to say to anybody who's listening?
I always want to emphasize personal responsibility. Because we all need healthy ecosystems, it's our responsibility to keep them healthy. If we're going to have the hubris to say we own a piece of the earth, we also own the responsibility of taking care of that piece. So the idea that, there's just a few ecologists and a few conservation biologists and it's their job and everybody else has a green light to destroy the earth, that's not going to work anymore. You're a member of this planet. You're using the resources, so you have to help sustain them, whether you like nature or not. I'm sorry, that's your responsibility. But you know what? It's a lot of fun. It's very rewarding. So this is not a punishment.
Yeah, no, the aesthetics, just getting to see all of the cool organisms that come into your yard after you add even a few native plants is extremely rewarding.
It is.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you coming on Zoom and having this conversation with me. And yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Good luck. You're a substantial part of the future. You're young, you're interested, you're helping to spread the word. We got to get this out of the hands of the old folks like me. So good. I'm empowering.
Well, you're doing a really good job. So
all right. Well, good luck.
Thank you.
Hi there, folks. Just one more thing before you head on out. If you have a moment, as I mentioned at the beginning, I would love to hear in what ways you are finding this podcast useful, how you listen, what you would like to hear more of, less of, etc. Please feel free to send me any and all feedback, any ideas for guests, etc. to Kevin Madison at my email, which is mattiskc@miamioh.edu. That's spelled MATTESKC @miamioh.edu. Thanks again for listening and have a great day.